The case. Chao-chou visited a hermit. He asked, "Is anybody in? Anybody in?" The hermit lifted up his fist. Chao-chou said, "The water is too shallow for a ship to anchor." Later, he went to a hermit and asked, "Is anybody in? Anybody in?" The hermit also lifted up his fist. Chao-chou said, "Freely you give, and freely you take away. Freely you kill, and freely you give life." And he made a full prostration. Gateless Gate, Case 11. A while back, a friend referred to an important personal question he was pondering as an honest koan. That set me to thinking once again about how the word koan has mutated and its use expanded within American and perhaps English writ large. My friend and a host of others, including Zen teachers, although it's important to distinguish, Zen teachers who have not engaged in the discipline of koan introspection have come to use the word koan to stand for a particularly thorny problem. Actually, on occasion, I've even seen koan downgraded to simply a synonym for a question, difficult or not. In several senses, this use is not wrong. First, language is mutable. It shifts and changes and is put to uses other than originally meant. However, one does need to be at least a little bit careful. The word prevent, for instance, as used in the 17th century English of the King James Bible, and actually means to lead forth. Not understanding context can take us in wrong directions, in that case, literally. And, of course, words can have multiple uses, slightly different for different purposes or within different specialized disciplines. Look at any dictionary. There are, for most words, a number of, sometimes a veritable host of different meanings. And here, the use of the word koan to mean question, or especially a thorny question or problem, is at base true enough. The word comes to us from the Chinese gong'an and translates literally as public case, as in a legal document. It is applied to exchanges mostly between Zen teachers and students or other Zen teachers, which can range from a word such as mu or no to rather long narratives with a number of what we call wato or word heads, each pointing to something particularly important on the Zen way. In fact, the American ancestor of our Zen way, Robert Aitken, who you can see right over here, he suggests a koan is, quote, a matter to be made clear. Here we get a bit closer to the heart of the matter. Here, koans are set up to open us up, to take us someplace. Or perhaps a bit more accurately, and using an old Zen saw, they become fingers pointing to the moon. Pointers, giving us a direction for our own walking to our own place. Koans are, and it's really important to say this, human creations. They are not from the gods. They are not channeled through some prophet. They are tools. And like that other tool, the axe, they can be used in any number of ways. Although it's also important to note they're not merely expedients either. Axe is a metaphor. So, without our participation, they're simply ancient stories that usually seem oblique at best, They can hang in the air like non sequiturs, but when we bring our hearts and our being to the project, then they are lamps casting light onto the recesses of our lives. They become cups holding the coolest water, waiting for the thirsty to drink. So axe is an interesting image, and axe doesn't quite do it for koan as a spiritual discipline. With that, Chao-chou's visit to the hermits. He goes and asks at the door of the first hut if anyone's there. The response is that raised fist. Simple gestures like that are common in Zen's koan literature. A raised fist, a single finger pointed up, or a variation on that theme, simply turning around and facing the wall. And he exclaims, "How shallow. No boat can anchor there." If that were all to it, it doesn't seem to mean much of anything. But then the old worthy Chao-chou goes again to a hut and asks if anyone is there. Again, a hermit appears and raises his fist. But this time that action is met with what appears to be the wildest praise. Freedom, life, death, all in the moment. Chao-chou Kongshen, he's one of the great ancestors of our Zen world. According to the tradition, he was born at the tail end of the 8th century and lived almost to the end of the 9th. We see him in numerous koans. Of the 3 great collections, he appears 20 times. He's also the source of what is sometimes called the first koan, the one through which the majority of people practicing koan Zen will begin. It's brief. A student of the way comes to him and asks, "Does dog have Buddha nature?" He responds, "No." In Chinese, this is rendered either as wu or mu. As the official teaching of the Mahayana is that everyone has Buddha nature, we're all presented with what appears to be a conundrum. The student is given the koan, and as they say, hilarity ensues. Sometimes for years. On occasion, for a lifetime. Here, with the 2 hermits, we're given another conundrum. At least it appears a conundrum. Of course, Aitken Roshi says, actually, it's a matter to be made clear. But what happens when we make it clear? A whole spiritual life, in my opinion, requires more than koans, but my goodness, they are useful. I can't express how powerfully useful they can be. They've given me my spiritual life. Actually, that's not quite it. More accurately, they have given me my life. No one's precisely sure where koans as a spiritual discipline come from. The scholar and Zen priest Victor Sogen Hori believes they may have their distant origins within medieval Taoist drinking games, where someone starts a poem and someone else must match it in some way that's acceptable to everyone present. This appears to me as something that should be true, and I do like to repeat it as a fact. And, it might well be. It appears when the discipline first emerged, a person was given one of these koan and would then ponder it for, well, pretty much a lifetime. Occasionally one would check in with a spiritual director, but largely the deal was the responsibility of the person who had taken it on within their life. It became part of the basket of meditative disciplines practiced within the Zen schools. That's another word that has taken a bit of a beating in popular American English usage. It appears in English mostly in the sense of relaxing, chilling out, with echoes of Hakuna Mata in The Lion King. It means no worries for the rest of your days. It's our problem-free philosophy, which is not Zen in any of its traditional uses. Zen's literal meaning is meditation, and it mostly refers to a cluster of schools that began in China and eventually immigrated to Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and now to various Western cultures. In the West, thanks largely to Alan Watts, it has come to have a secondary meaning as the awakened life. And there's some historical precedence for that as well. You run into that all over social media, which is generously populated with self-appointed Zen masters. From there, we got the easy slide into no worries for the rest of your days, problem-free philosophy. But Zen, the Zen of China and Korea and Vietnam and Japan, that Zen is a school of Buddhism, schools where meditation is the primary discipline, and koans are very much part of that meditative discipline. That human discipline with grubby roots in Taoist drinking games. The early Zen masters took the stories of their tradition and offered them in the spirit of that game. Pretty soon, teachers began using a number of koans, both as subjects for talks and as objects for meditation, picked out for particular needs for particular students. Eventually, they would take on the shape of a curricula. It's at a set number a student was expected to engage and pass. Contrary to what you may have heard, there are very much right and wrong answers. I've mentioned this before in our American culture. Boy, the pushback is fast on that one. Now, my own definition of a real koan, a koan as used within the koan schools of Zen, is that a koan is a statement about reality and an invitation to a response, an invitation to stand in that place. In practice, this response, this standing, is given to a koan Zen teacher who then affirms or does not that response. At the beginning, mostly the responses fall into the does not category. Lots of no on the Zen way, with the tantalizing, if frustrating, conflation of that no in the Dokusan room and the no of the dog. Now, koans are also used as the subject for conversations. Many pure Soto teachers who do not use them in the sense I've been describing do use them both as objects for talks and as the subjects for discussion within small groups or even just with a student. Recently, here in the West, teachers trained in what I'd consider the more precise usage have also encouraged people to engage them in this way as subjects for discussion. They can be enormously rich, and no harm, no foul. All worthy. Koans can be, and often are, doors into dream worlds. And there's much to be learned there in that place. But then, there is that direct pointing. And beyond dream worlds, koans point to the deep secret of who we are. Which is also why it's worth noting that actual competent guidance can be very important on the way to that intimate place. So, some distinctions might be helpful. The conversational koan engagement that we all do has come in some circles to be called koan study. And that more focused and frankly demanding discipline where one can pass or not, the place with right and wrong answers, as koan introspection. Some distinction regarding these two ways is important, I feel, and this is as good as any. Koans nestle within the great practice of shikantaza, just sitting. We begin with just sitting. Perhaps we engage our breath. We taste the mysteries of this moment and are invited to let go of our judgments. And just sitting can be the koan. Sit down and become Buddha. How's that for a koan? And for some of us, at some point, curricular koan introspection is called for. We engage a year, 10 years, 20. And then eventually we return to just sitting, or something very near, sitting down and becoming Buddha. This place is the field of possibility, the womb of the universe, the realm of awakening. Fancy words for something terribly important for us to find. At first, the koans were collected in spiritual biographies of prominent Zen masters. By the 13th century, anthologies of koans began to be published, all in China. The Gateless Gate, the Blue Cliff Record, and the Book of Serenity, principal among them. Since then, new anthologies have been published perhaps every generation. For example, the Entangling Vines collection, first published in Japan in 1689, ranks with those earlier collections as central for many on the koan way. By the time Hakuin Ikaku was born in Japan at the end of the 17th century, Zen masters were using long lists of koans that students were expected to pass, either by taking up the traditional collections one by one, or through an in-house list that basically recapitulated the same cases. Hakuin would come to be associated with this systematization and gave his name to it, Hakuin Zen, in Japan synonymous with koan Zen. In fact, the two principal streams of koan introspection study that informs pretty much all koan introspection practice in Japan today would be named for two of his students' students. As a small aside, there is a modern systematization in the West, not directly informed by Japanese koan work taught by successors of the Korean master Seung San. In my cursory exploration of it, I am impressed. It is clearly influenced by the Hakuin system, but precisely how starts to become elusive. The number of koans one traditionally engages is pretty substantial. The traditional mythic term is 1,700. In matter of fact, most koan introspection lists are somewhere in the vicinity of 4 or 5 or 600. Although they can be sliced and diced. Remember those various points to be found in some koans, many koans, and each could be counted as one by themselves. Anyway, one encounters a lot of koans in koan introspection. 10, 20, 30, 40 years to work through for most of us, if the formal training is completed. I took 20 to complete the formal part of koan practice. The word complete there should actually have scare quotes around it. We don't complete. There is another aspect beyond right and wrong to which we are invited. And completion is another one of those words that burn in the fire of what we're invited to. So, what is it that one encounters in koan? People with a little time on their hands have attempted to categorize koans. Hakuin himself suggested 5 categories, others more or fewer. One of the things I actually like about Koan's listing is how he introduced what he called nanto, which seems to translate as fucking hard. These koans, he identified 8 of these koans of the many hundreds that he worked through. I find it interesting that Hori Sensei seems to have found 10 or so of those 8 koans. So we don't appear to have a particularly tight grasp on this. Somehow, I like that. One Zen master suggested these 8 or 10 or whatever were particularly hard koans for Hakuin, suggesting, and it has been my experience, that we each will find our own nanto as we walk the koan way, starting with the first one. I suggest two kinds. First, koans. Koans that are concerned with helping us find our place within our original boundlessness. And then koans that explore various aspects of boundlessness and particularity, the great dance that is our lives, over and over again. The process is one of discovery and forgetting and discovering again, growing deeper in the dark soil of our practice. This is powerful stuff. It is about who we really are. And that who we are is expressed most succinctly in the Heart Sutra as form is emptiness, emptiness is form. In case we don't quite get it, the sutra goes on, form is exactly emptiness. Emptiness is exactly form. Bloodless words perhaps, but pointers to the life force of the universe and the secret of our human hearts. We, each of us, are boundless, and we are, each of us, just what we are. What we are, what we experience, what we see, what we touch, what we smell, taste, hear, and of course, what we think about those things. A child blowing bubbles, each one a world. We present into this world in all the complexity of who and what we are, formed out of genes and experiences, filled with passions and life and hurt, deep hurt, open wounds, wounds that never heal, and joys, of course, small and great, all of it just as it is. And each of these things are moments, confluences of time and space, which exist within and as those moments before shifting, changing. All of it, every blessed bit of it, wildly open. And that wild openness is exactly this world. Awakening is realizing these words are pointing to something we can experience. I hope, I should back up on that. Experience itself is another word that burns away in the ultimate reality, but it points us in the right direction. I hope, while koan becomes an English synonym for thorny problems, we don't forget they are also invitations from our ancestors to look deeply into our own hearts, somewhere past questions and even thorny questions, to the place where all questions arise and where all questions, at least those of meaning and purpose, of who and what we are, may be resolved. And so, the koan as an invitation from the heart to the heart. It takes us from a world filled with thoughts and notions into a dream realm. And from there to, Chao-chou, old Chao-chou. He goes to the hermit and asks, "Who are you?" The hermit avoids the trap of words and just presents. Chao-chou laughs and says, "Shallow water." Is that a rebuke? Or is it something else? Then Chao-chou goes to a hermit. We usually fill in with the word another. That doesn't seem to be in the original text. Just a hermit. This hermit, another hermit. Does it actually matter? Traps and snares all along the way for the unwary. He asks the same question. He gets the same intimate response. And he laughs and says, freely giving life, freely taking life. Do we hear an echo here? Form, emptiness, life, death. The invitation becomes a door, a dream, a key, a gate. Is it closed? Is it open? Turning the key and walking through, rolling through, sometimes crawling through, on occasion grabbed by the heart and dragged through. Self, other, just this, just